A Chinese woman shows her small and deformed feet due to the practice of foot binding, common in China in the late 19th century. At that time, having small feet was considered a desirable beauty standard. Feet were bound from childhood, forcing the bones to deform, resulting in severe physical disabilities. A woman from the Mangbetu tribe in the Democratic Republic of Congo holds her young child in a photo from the 1930s. The baby, with a visibly elongated head, is the result of a traditional practice called lipombo. This technique involved shaping the head from birth, while the skull was still malleable, using strips of fabric to elongate it over time. A 17th century metal mask, used to restrain individuals deemed insane, is a heavy and uncomfortable artifact designed to prevent patients from speaking or screaming. At that time, treatment practices for mental illness were rudimentary and often cruel. Dr. Moody Jacobs shows a large bruise on the body of Anne Hodges, who was struck by a meteorite. In November 1954, in the small town of Sylacauga, Alabama, Anne Hodges was sleeping on her sofa when a meteorite crashed through her roof and hit her, making her the first and only known person to have been struck by a meteorite. Princess Fateme Khanum, daughter of Nasser al-Din Shah Qajar, was considered a symbol of Persian beauty in the early 1900s. At that time, beauty standards were very different from today's, and the princess represented the aesthetic ideal of her culture. According to reports, she had 145 suitors, all fascinated by her beauty and position. Among them, 13 ended up taking their own lives after being rejected by her. In the photo, we see a picnic at the California Alligator Farm in Los Angeles, a peculiar attraction that operated from 1907 to 1953. This unusual location offered visitors the chance to interact freely with alligators, which were reportedly trained to coexist peacefully with people. The alligator farm became one of the most curious attractions of its time, providing a unique experience that, by today's standards, would be considered quite risky. In the 1930s, when alarm clocks were expensive and unreliable, many people in Britain hired human alarm clocks to wake them up in creative ways. One example is Mary Smith, who earned about 6 pence a week by shooting dried peas at the windows of sleeping workers in East London. In the 1920s, hundreds of young women working in watch factories were exposed to high levels of radiation due to the use of radium paint, a radioactive element. These women, known as radium girls, often returned home with their bodies glowing in the dark due to the radiation from the paint used to luminesce numbers and hands-on clocks. Constant exposure to radium caused severe health issues, such as anemia, cancer, and bone necrosis, particularly in the jaw, known as radium jaw. The late 19th century photo shows two women pulling a cart in Battlesden. This type of vehicle was more common among working-class people or in rural areas during the Victorian era, primarily used for transporting goods or in hard labor situations. The 19th century mass shaving machine was a curious invention capable of shaving up to 12 men at once. Despite its innovation, the idea did not succeed due to a lack of precision and safety. The machine could not adjust the blades to different face shapes, resulting in uneven cuts and, at times, injuries. A man covered in bees, creating what appears to be a living beard. This practice, which demonstrates the bravery of some beekeepers, is common at fairs, highlighting the importance of these insects. Participants place a queen bee near their face to attract other bees, forming a beard made of bees. In the 1946 photo, a bear, guided by its trainer, is used in a curious treatment to relieve back pain of a young man in Romania. The method involved the bear applying pressure to the patient's back with its weight, which some believed acted as a therapeutic massage. In the 1930s in London, mothers would place their babies in cages suspended outside their apartment windows. These cages were made of metal and had a strong structure to hold the baby, being firmly attached to the windows. As strange as it may seem today, this idea was supported by doctors at the time, who believed that fresh air was good for children. Miraculously, there are no records of injuries or deaths caused by the use of these cages. A couple dressed in ceremonial attire during the San Juan de los Lagos Fair in Mexico in 1940. This event is a traditional religious festival where the faithful show their devotion and seek miracles. The woman wears a crown of thorns and bands covering her face, symbolizing suffering and faith, while the thorny nopal she carries on her chest represents penitence and the hope of receiving blessings. In July 1913, a Mongolian woman was subjected to a severe punishment. She was locked in a wooden box and left without food until she starved to death. This extreme form of punishment, which also involved public humiliation, was used for serious crimes in Mongolian society at the time. Walter Yeo, a sailor who was severely injured in the face during the Battle of Jutland in World War I, was one of the first to receive an advanced skin graft. In 1917, under the care of Dr. Harold Gillies, a pioneer in plastic surgery, Yeo underwent the innovative procedure. The photo captures Yeo after the surgery, showing the beginning of his recovery. Photo of Alvin Karpus's fingers, a notorious criminal and member of the dangerous Karpus Barker gang. His fingerprints were altered by Dr. Joseph Moran, a Chicago physician who performed illegal procedures for criminals. Moran attempted to remove Karpus's fingerprints through surgery to make identification more difficult. Despite efforts to alter his fingerprints, the FBI was able to identify him, and Karpus was arrested in New Orleans in 1936. In the 1875 photograph, we see 3 women in Shanghai bound by a kang, a common punishment in China at that time. The kang was a large wooden plank around the neck that restricted movement and prevented the condemned from lying down or eating without assistance. This form of punishment was used to humiliate offenders, serving as a public and severe form of justice. In 1939, after noticing that women from poor families were using flour sacks to make clothes for their children, some mills began producing their flour sacks with floral and patterned fabrics, turning a basic and utilitarian item into something that could be repurposed in a more dignified manner. In the photo, Dr. Rufus B. Weaver is seen showcasing the result of his meticulous work preserving the nervous system of Harriet Cole at Hahnemann Medical College in Philadelphia. Harriet Cole, a hospital janitor who passed away in 1888, made a significant contribution to science by donating her body for scientific study after her death. Dr. Weaver's work was exceptionally innovative for the time, successfully extracting and preserving the entire nervous system of a human being. In the photo, 2 men with straw hats covering their faces participate in a traditional wedding in Ireland in 1922. During the celebrations, these straw boys appear to bring luck and health to the newlyweds. They are seen as a positive omen and have the role of entertaining the party, interacting with guests, and spreading joy. Edward Llewellyn showing off the world's largest black sea bass, which weighed an incredible 425 pounds and was about 8 feet long. The photo was taken in a small coastal town in California in 1903. The fish was so large that Llewellyn had to tie it to the side of the boat to bring it back to shore. A crowd gathered on July 4, 1905, in Pueblo, Colorado, to watch an impressive horse diving show. This show, popular at the beginning of the 20th century, had horses jumping from towers up to 60 feet high into pools of water. Sometimes the horses jumped alone, and other times with a rider, making the act even riskier. Despite organizers claiming it was safe for the animals, this practice was abandoned due to concerns about the horses' well-being. Jack the baboon worked at the Uitenhage railway station in the Cape Province of South Africa starting in 1890. He was responsible for operating the signals to ensure trains followed the correct routes and reached their destinations safely. During his 9 years of work, Jack never made a mistake. Waiters served lunch to 2 steelworkers on a beam high above New York City on November 14, 1930, during the construction of the famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Balancing high up, they enjoyed a well-deserved break with a touch of normalcy. A woman wears a mask with a smile drawn on it. The photo was taken in Budapest in the late 1930s, when the city was facing high suicide rates. To combat this issue, the Smile Club was created, aiming to encourage people to smile more, believing that this could improve the overall well-being of the population. The Dynasphere, created by John Archibald Purvis in 1932, was a single-wheeled electric vehicle that could reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. Steering was controlled by leaning the body forward or backward, shifting the center of gravity. Despite its futuristic appearance and promises to revolutionize transportation, the Dynasphere faced practical limitations that prevented its success. Two soldiers wearing gas masks while peeling onions. During the preparation for a meal at a training camp, these soldiers found an unusual way to avoid tears while cutting onions. The cyclomer was an amphibious bicycle created in Paris in 1932, designed to operate both on land and in water. It featured large floats on the wheels that allowed it to float on water, functioning like a pedal boat. Despite the innovative idea, the bicycle did not appeal to the public. It was heavy and difficult to maneuver, making its use impractical. A family wears gas masks at Wembley Park in London in 1938. At that time, the threat of war was imminent, and the British government had distributed gas masks to the population in preparation for potential chemical attacks. Even during leisure activities such as a day at the pool, people wore these masks as a precaution. A house was transported by a barge in Tiburon, California in 1957. This practice allowed entire structures to be moved across bodies of water, facilitating the relocation of homes to areas difficult to access by land. Crouse, known as the woman with a slender body and hairy limbs, was a famous figure in the late 19th century. Discovered in the jungles of Laos in 1885, she had a condition called hypertrichosis, which caused excessive hair growth all over her body. She was exhibited in circuses and shows as a wonder of nature and a link between humans and primates. Model Frances Richards smokes a pack of cigarettes with a long cigarette holder during a 1960s photo shoot. The photo captures the glamour that smoking had at the time, something widely promoted. However, over time, research began to reveal health risks, changing public opinion. This is Francesco Lentini, known as the three-legged man. Born in 1889 in Sicily, Lentini was born with a rare condition due to a parasitic twin, resulting in 3 legs. In his youth, he moved to the United States, where he built a career performing in circus shows. George and Willie Muse were identical albino twins who were kidnapped by a circus when they were still children in the early 20th century. Forced to perform in freak shows, they were made to grow their hair long and were presented as Martian men. After many years in captivity, the brothers were eventually freed with the help of their mother, who found and fought for their release. An anthropologist displaying his pair of shrunken heads, known as tzatzas, in Ecuador, 19th century. These heads were created by indigenous peoples of the Amazon region, such as the Shuar, who performed a ritual to reduce the size of their enemies' heads as part of their traditions. The tzatzas were regarded as war trophies and objects with spiritual power, believed to have influence over the spirit of the defeated enemy. Fannie Mills, known as the Ohio Bigfoot Girl, gained fame in the late 19th century due to a rare medical condition called elephantiasis, which caused her feet to grow to an enormous size. Her feet measured approximately 17 inches in length and 19 inches in circumference, making her a popular attraction in sideshows and circus acts. A couple entering a BMW Isetta through its single front door. Known as the bubble car, the Isetta became popular in the 1950s for being economical and easy to drive in post-war cities. Despite its small size, the vehicle could accommodate up to 4 people, 3 in the front seat and 1 in the back. Participants in a leg beauty contest with pillowcases covering their heads compete at Palisades Amusement Park in New Jersey in 1951. In the post-war period, the park sought creative and entertaining ways to engage visitors. While beauty contests were common, the fact that this one focused exclusively on the contestants' legs attracted a large audience. Inventor Hugo Gernsback using a pair of his television glasses in 1963. Gernsback, a prominent figure in the field of science and technology, was a pioneer in various inventions and ideas that shaped the modern view of technology. These television glasses were one of his attempts to revolutionize the way people watch television, offering a more personal and immersive experience. In the photo, a young man stands near a street urinal, one of many installed in Paris in the 19th century. Today, the idea of outdoor urinals might seem odd, as they were placed in locations where anyone could see. However, at the time, these urinals were a practical solution to the issue of public hygiene. A 1900 anti-electricity propaganda poster. This piece is an example of the campaign against the use of electric power, warning about potential dangers and encouraging the use of traditional lighting methods, such as candles and oil lamps. A woman wears a mask during Mardi Gras in New Orleans, 1903. Mardi Gras, a traditional celebration preceding Lent, is famous for its bizarre and frightening costumes, with masks and outfits creating an enigmatic and dramatic look. Photo of Josephine Myrtle Corbin, known as the four-legged girl from Texas. Myrtle was born in 1868 with a rare condition called dipygus, which caused partial duplication of her body, resulting in a parasitic twin attached to her pelvis. From a young age, Myrtle became a popular attraction in sideshow acts in the United States and later married and had children despite her medical condition. A soldier wearing a steel helmet, narrow-slit goggles, and a steel gauntlet in the shape of a dagger. These equipment were developed during World War I to protect soldiers in the trenches, where close combat was frequent. A Red Cross dog wearing a gas mask during World War I in 1917. This dog was part of a group of animals trained to perform search and rescue missions on the battlefield, where conditions were extremely dangerous due to the continuous use of chemical weapons. In this photo from 1881, we see a man in Kankakee, Georgia, next to a large clay vessel called a kvevré, used for storing and aging wine. Buried in the ground, the kvevré has an incredible preservation capacity, with some found in excavations still containing drinkable wine after centuries. Paul Alexander spent most of his life relying on an iron lung after contracting polio in childhood. Diagnosed at age 6, his condition impaired the normal functioning of his respiratory muscles. The iron lung, a metal cylinder that aided breathing through negative pressure, was crucial for his survival and allowed him to pursue his studies and even become a lawyer. He passed away on March 11, 2024. In the photo, we see two World War I soldiers known as sound finders. Equipped with large acoustic horns connected to their ears, they were able to detect distant sounds and identify the origin of enemy aircraft. Before radar, these soldiers relied solely on the sound of airplanes to determine their location, playing a crucial role in air defense during the war. In the photo, students are taking an exam while wearing anti-cheating hats. These hats, typically made from paper or simple materials, block the side view of classmates, preventing anyone from peeking at others' answers. A massive pile of bison skulls was photographed outdoors at a Michigan carbon works factory in Rougeville at the end of the 19th century. The bones of these animals were collected and processed to produce fertilizers, glue, and activated carbon used in sugar refineries. During the height of overhunting, more than 50 million bison were killed in North America, nearly driving the species to extinction. The ice mask, designed to cure hangovers, was a curious invention from the 1940s, created by Max Factor Jr., a renowned Hollywood makeup artist. This peculiar device was developed to reduce facial swelling, a common problem faced by actors and actresses after long nights or social events. A group of contestants in a beauty pageant held in England in 1955. The contestants wore hoods so that the judges could evaluate only their posture and bearing, without being influenced by facial appearance. The goal of the event was to promote beauty as a broader and more inclusive concept. In the photo, a soldier sprays an Italian house with DDT and kerosene during World War II in 1945 to combat malaria. While effective against mosquitoes, this practice posed serious health risks due to the toxicity of DDT and the irritation caused by kerosene. At the time, these dangers were not fully understood. A Chinese bride covers her face with a basket while walking to her wedding in 1911. At that time in China, it was common for brides to hide their faces during wedding ceremonies as a symbol of modesty and to protect against evil eyes, following an ancient tradition. In the 1949 photo, we see a jet tanning machine, a curious device of the time. This equipment was designed to apply a thin layer of tanning solution to the skin, providing a tan effect without the need for sun exposure. In 1941, a curious beauty treatment called the glamour cap became popular among women. The device was a cap that covered the entire head, including the face, and had a hose that created a slight pressure, simulating a vacuum effect. The idea was that this gentle suction would help revitalize the skin, giving it a younger and healthier appearance. The photo shows thousands of empty 105 shells scattered across the battlefield after an intense Allied bombardment during World War I, all fired in a single day against German lines in 1916. The image is striking, illustrating the massive scale of artillery used during the conflict. To give an idea of the intensity, during the Battle of the Somme, the British Army fired over 1.5 million shells in just 1 week before the troops' advance began. Black prisoners participating in a barrel race in 1905, a common practice in U.S. prisons at that time. These activities, created to entertain the guards, were degrading and exploited the prisoners. They highlighted the inhumane conditions of the prison system and the racial inequalities in society. In 1917, Elsie Wright and Francis Griffiths were photographed with the so-called Cottingley fairies in the village of Cottingley, England. The two cousins, using paper cutouts and pins, created 5 photos that appeared to show tiny fairies dancing around them. Writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed in the photos and used them as evidence of supernatural beings in an article for the Strand magazine. Years later, in 1983, the cousins admitted that the photos were fake. A radiology nurse dressed in full protective gear is depicted in 1918. At that time, radiology was a relatively new practice, and the risks of radiation exposure were not fully understood. To minimize these dangers, nurses wore heavy lead clothing, aprons, and special gloves during procedures. 2 women wearing peculiar plastic masks to protect themselves from a snowstorm in Montreal in 1939. That winter, Canada faced extreme conditions with frequent snowstorms and biting winds that made everyday life challenging. In 1930 in Hungary, cosmetic procedures to improve skin appearance were becoming popular. In this image, a woman is using a device to remove freckles from her face, with her nostrils blocked and breathing through a special tube. 3 young women winners of the Perfect Posture Contest held at a chiropractic convention in 1956. The method for choosing the winner was unusual. Each participant had to stand with 1 foot on each of 2 scales, measuring the weight distribution. Those who achieved an exact 50% split on each foot were awarded, indicating perfect body posture. A grim advertisement for the anti-malarial drug Atabrine, displayed during World War II. This campaign was common in the Pacific theaters, where malaria posed a serious threat to the health of Allied troops. The goal was to encourage soldiers to regularly take Atabrine to prevent the disease. In 1932, in England, a circus trainer was photographed inside an elephant's mouth. At that time, circuses commonly showcased trained elephants performing impressive tricks, attracting people of all ages. Although today the use of wild animals in circuses is controversial, such practices were common and accepted by the public seeking entertainment back then. An elephant being used to transport supplies to an American plane in 1945 in Southeast Asia. In this region, elephants were widely used in military operations, especially in forests and mountains where vehicles couldn't pass. They also helped build roads and bridges by pushing logs and lifting large structures. The 1936 photo captures an unusual moment when the New South Wales Police in Australia participated in a quirky competition. They transformed their motorcycles into carriages by attaching a cart behind and connecting 2 bikes at the front, simulating a horse-drawn carriage. A police officer is photographed transporting a detainee in a cell attached to a motorcycle in Los Angeles in the 1920s. Although it was a practical solution at the time, allowing for the efficient transport of detainees, the metal cell, which resembled a cage, gave the impression that the detainee was being treated like an animal in captivity. Women pose with giant, bizarre heads during Mardi Gras celebrations at Venice Beach, Los Angeles in 1930. On this day, hundreds of people gathered at the beach to celebrate one of the area's most colorful and lively festivals. Among the participants, these women stood out with large papier-mâché masks featuring exaggerated features and frightening expressions. The fight between the living skeleton and the fat man was a popular attraction at fairs and circuses in the early 20th century. These events were more about entertainment than actual competition and attracted audiences fascinated by unusual physical differences. In the 1938 photo, Maryland inventor George Stern demonstrates his highly volatile fluid that evaporates so quickly it doesn't burn. Stern created this liquid for visual effects in horror films. The invention was notable for producing dense fogs without the risk of fire, making it useful for creating mysterious atmospheres and intensifying suspense in cinema. In the photo, a postal worker is holding a child inside a mailbag. When the USPS Parcel Post Service officially started on January 1, 1913, it allowed the shipping of large packages, including people, as long as they did not weigh more than 11 pounds and were properly packaged. A famous case occurred in 1914 when the Brown family from Ohio sent their 8-month-old daughter, Marie, by mail to save on train fare. A security guard walking along U.S. Highway 101, surrounded by huge piles of hollow iron floats. These floats were used during World War II to suspend anti-submarine nets, which protected American ports from potential enemy submarine attacks. Women wearing wooden swimsuits in Hoquiam, Washington in 1929. The idea was to utilize the lightness of the wood to assist swimmers, but the rigid and heavy material, especially when wet, made swimming difficult and uncomfortable, preventing the popularity of this invention. Women in a contest called Miss Lovely Eyes that took place in Florida in 1930. In this event, the focus was on evaluating only the beauty of the contestants' eyes, disregarding other physical attributes. To achieve this, the contestants wore masks that covered almost their entire face, leaving only their eyes and nose exposed. A British chamber pot from the early 19th century featuring a bust of Napoleon Bonaparte. At the time, the Napoleonic Wars were in full swing, and Napoleon was seen as the main adversary of the United Kingdom. Creating and using such an item served as a form of insult and mockery. In the 1936 photo, a woman is using a machine designed to remove fat from the legs. The device featured rotating cylinders that promised to reduce localized fat through mechanical movements on the legs. However, doubts about its effectiveness soon emerged, and medical studies showed that it is not possible to eliminate fat solely through vibration or compression. O.S.A. Johnson takes an improvised bath in a hole in the ground in Kenya, 1923, with the help of a local woman holding her towel. For Johnson, it was an exotic experience, but for the locals it was a normal part of daily life due to limited access to water and basic infrastructure. In the photo, Parisians walk across chairs during the flood of 1924. That year, the River Seine rose 24 feet, flooding much of Paris. With the streets submerged, cafe and restaurant chairs were lined up to create an improvised bridge so people could cross without getting wet. In the image, we see 3 women by the pool, each wearing a sun-blocking mask in France in 1950. These masks, which may seem strange today, were used to protect the face from sunlight, a common practice at the time to maintain pale skin, which was seen as a symbol of status and beauty. In the photo, a woman reads a book while wearing an inhalation mask connected to a device, created as protection against the Spanish flu, which severely affected the global population in 1918 and 1919. These inhalation masks, like the one in the picture, were designed to filter the air and block the entry of virus particles, providing a layer of protection when available treatments were limited. The impressive old Stockholm telephone tower in Stockholm was built in 1887 with a height of approximately 262 feet. It connected over 5,500 telephone lines and was crucial for communication in the city. With the advancement of underground telephone lines, the tower became obsolete and was decommissioned in 1913. In the 1890 photo, we see a young girl with wooden and leather prosthetics. At that time, prosthetics were custom-made by craftsmen, often manually and without advanced technology. The manufacturing process could take weeks or even months to complete. In the photo, we see Haruo Nakajima dressed as Godzilla next to Momoko Kochi on the film set in 1954. Nakajima, who played the giant monster, wore a suit that weighed approximately 220 pounds, making the work extremely exhausting. To make Godzilla appear enormous, the filmmakers created miniature sets with cities, buildings, vehicles, and other elements surrounding him. pie-eating contest participants on the beach in 1937. They are leaning forward with their hands behind their backs, trying to eat their slice of pie as quickly as possible without using their hands. These competitions were popular events at the time, especially during the summer months, and were held on beaches and in parks as a fun and laid-back form of entertainment. Anne-Margret, the famous Swedish-American actress and singer, is seen leaving the stage in Phu Ba, Vietnam, after a performance for American troops in 1966. During the Vietnam War, Anne-Margret participated in several USO, United Service Organizations, tours, dedicating her time and talent to entertain and boost the morale of American soldiers serving in combat areas. A German police officer receives instructions on resuscitation techniques in Berlin. This training is part of post-war reconstruction and restructuring efforts in Germany. In 1946, the Allied occupation forces focused on reforming German institutions, including the creation of a new police force that incorporated democratic and modern principles. First aid and resuscitation training were part of this process, ensuring that both male and female officers were equipped to respond to emergencies and meet the needs of the civilian population.